Thank you for giving us the Sabbath day to fellowship with each other. It's an amazing blessing. Lord, thank you for the trials in our lives, even though they're difficult. Thank you for refining us, so that we can come closer to you, so that we can know you more, so that we can be in the kingdom with you, Lord. Thank you for all the blessings in our lives. I don't think we appreciate them enough. So many things that we can be thankful for, Lord, and I pray that you'd teach us to be more and more thankful each day for everything you give us and everything, all the blessings in our lives. Lord, I pray that you'd bless everybody here, bless everybody online watching. Bless our ears, that we can hear your wonderful word. Lord, I pray for JP. Bless his work that he's done all this week, and thank you for everything you give us, Lord. Praise your holy name. Amen.
Cool. Okay, so Torah portion Vayera, that's how it's pronounced. We're going to continue to go through Genesis, and as we saw a couple of weeks ago, the people in Genesis don't have the scriptures. They don't have the Torah. But what they do have is faith, so that when Yehovah appears to them, they do what he says to do. They get their instructions live from Yehovah. And we're going to see Abraham kind of get into grips with who Yehovah is. He's learning about him on the fly as all of these things are happening. And we're going to look at the idea. Anyone who came to Sukkot knows that what's been on my mind recently is this idea of put away the foreign gods from among you. As we've all kind of come to a point where we're obedient to Torah. Torah is not a problem. What's a problem is some of the false ideas that we've got about who Yehovah is. I'm going to be particularly looking at it in Torah portion Vayishlach, but it comes up quite a bit in this Torah portion as well, because we've just got some foreign concepts of who he is that don't come from the Bible. They just come from, I don't know, either our experience or what we were expecting, and then how our walks have turned out, and they're not actually scriptural. He's very gracious. He meets us where we're at, and he meets us in these things. I spoke a couple of weeks ago about how I had all sorts of crazy ideas about what God is, as I would have seen it at the time, and he met me where I was in my understanding, but he also drew me out of that. He guided me through it. Hebrews 11:8-10 says, "By belief Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he was about to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By belief he sojourned in the land of promise as a stranger, dwelling in tents with Yitzchak and Yaakov, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking for the city having foundations, whose builder and maker is Elohim." Okay, so he'd received these instructions from Yehovah, and for us, we've received the instructions. We've got his word, we've got his Torah. And he went out, and he just went to the place where he'd been instructed to go. He was living life as he'd been instructed to live life. But when he got there, even though he'd been told, "You're going to inherit this place, that's what I'm going to do, this is my promise to you," when he arrived there, he just followed the instruction that he'd been given. And that was enough. He wasn't constantly in prayer to Yehovah saying, "How are you going to do this? How are you going to bring about the thing that you've promised?" He just went and he lived life in the land. You know, when Lot was kidnapped, when all the things that were happening to him, these were just events that were happening, and he just trusted in Yahovah. He followed the instructions that he'd been given, trusted in Yahovah, and dealt with the events as they came up in his life. But this is where we're going to find him at the beginning of the Torah portion. It says that he was dwelling in tents. Yahovah appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre. As we've seen before, Mamre was a guy. They were his terebinth trees, while he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and he saw 3 men standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground. Okay, so these people are described as 3 men. And he said, Yahovah, if I found favor in your eyes, please do not pass your servant by. So, don't ever let anybody ever tell you that Yahovah has never come to the earth as a man, because he has. And this is something that we're going to look at. Okay, in the beginning, there was Yahovah. Yahovah created the heavens, and he created the earth. But the important thing about this is that the heavens and the earth are creations. Yahovah is outside of them. He created them, but he was outside of them. The thing which throws people off when they're trying to understand how Yahovah could have come to the earth as a man, how Yeshua could be Yahovah, is their concept of who Yahovah is that he's the Father. But where's the Father? The Father's in heaven. Okay? He wasn't creating the heavens and the earth from heaven. He created the heavens and the earth from outside of heaven, and then he came to dwell in the temple which is in heaven. And there's a temple on the earth as well, and he came and he dwelt in the temple on the earth. So he was simultaneously dwelling in the temple in heaven and the temple on the earth. He can also come to dwell in us as his temple as well. But it's all Yahovah, because Yahovah is outside of it all and he is coming into his creation. So the Father in heaven isn't the entirety of who Yahovah is. He's one of the ways that he exists and operates within his creation. So Yahovah is the Father. Okay? But Yahovah can also come to the earth as a man, and that's what we see in this Torah portion. People will say, oh, you don't see anything like that in the Old Testament, do you? Of course you do. Yahovah was a man on the earth. So please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And let me bring a piece of bread and refresh your hearts, and then go on. For this is why you've come to your servant. And they said, do as you've said. And this is an important thing for us to recognize. Okay? The Hebrew does seem to be that Abraham is saying, this is why you've come to your servant. And I don't know why he was saying that, but I can take something from him having said that I can apply to our lives. We tend to do this, don't we? When something happens in our life, we tend to look for the reason why it's happened, and we say things like, everything happens for a reason, or if something bad happens, we say, there will have been a reason for it. That's not scriptural. That's a foreign God. That is not the God of Scripture at all. Yahovah is outside of time. He knows everything that was going to happen, and he uses all those things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. But that is totally different from saying that everything happens for a reason. Okay? That's not true. When something happens in our lives, we can't be saying, well, there's a reason for it. We could say, Yahovah will use this for good, ultimately, but we can't say that everything happens for a reason. That's not scriptural. That's an example of the sort of mythology that I'm talking about. People in the Christian church have this idea of a mythological God who acts in very much the same way as the gods of the pagans. There's a very new agey idea of, everything happens for a reason. When I moved into my flat, there's a girl who lives opposite, and she was locked out of her flat one day. I was speaking to her, and she said she said, what do you do? I said, I'm a pastor, believe in God. And I was telling her a little bit about that. And she said, oh, I believe everything happens for a reason too. And that's kind of the concept that people have in their heads of what it is to believe in God. It's certainly very prevalent in the Christian church. But these are the sort of things that we need to weed out of our understanding and the way that we expect him to operate in our lives. Judges 6:15-23 says, and he said to him, O Yehovah, with what do I save Israel? See, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am least in my father's house. And Yehovah said to him, because I am with you, you shall smite the Midianites as one man. This is really key for us to understand. How are we to go about our lives if we're not to constantly be praying to him for direction, constantly be asking him to show us a little bit of the future? That's the key to it, isn't it? Because I am with you. And that's all that we need to know. We don't need to be trying to ask him directly for wisdom for our lives. We just get on and we do his instructions. That is by far and away enough wisdom for us to live the lives that we need to live. He operates in the background. He is with us throughout all of it. But we're constantly trying to take some of his control of the situation and ask him for it kind of in advance. But that's enough for us, the idea of be still and know that I am God. Okay, you don't need to understand all of this in advance. In fact, you can't understand all of this in advance. There's no way that this could be related to you and then you could live it out. If you knew what the future was in advance, you would change the future by your knowledge of it. And he said to him, please, if I found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that it is you who are speaking with me. And we've looked at this before, but this is something vital, because people will use phrases like, Yehovah told me this, or Yehovah told me that. But when he appears to these people, he appears to them directly and he tells them very, very plainly what it is that he wants them to do. If he's going to say, I want you to do this, he appears to them and tells them, or he'll appear in a dream and tell them very explicitly what it is that he wants them to do. Okay, people will get the idea that Yehovah is speaking to them somehow through the events of their life or whatever it is. But we've got to come to terms with the fact that that's not the Elohim that we see in scriptures. I've talked before about looking at signs and looking at things that are happening around us and subjectively interpreting them and almost treating Yehovah as if he's going to give us a trail of breadcrumbs to follow through our life. And people will say things like, I prayed about it and I feel peace about it. So what? The heart's deceitfully wicked above all things. Praying and feeling peace about things is not found in Scripture. Praying and not feeling something is, not feeling peace about it. That's not a sign that that's not what you're to do. Okay, again, we don't find anything like that in Scripture. We have our desires, what we want to do. And sometimes we're going to feel good about an idea, and sometimes we're going to be scared. And Yehovah says to us, when these thoughts come up in your heart and you feel scared, do not fear, for I am with you. He doesn't say, oh, if those thoughts come up in your heart, that's a bad sign because you don't feel peace about it. That's a foreign God. But these are the terms very much that Christians speak in, and it kind of becomes incorporated into everyone's idea of who God is. So when they come to God, they're expecting all of these things. And as I say, he's gracious and he meets us in those things. And not to say that he won't work through a situation like that. The situations that I described, I had such a crazy idea of who he was. But he met me in that and he was gracious. But there did come a point when it was enough. And I stopped taking my insulin. And I ended up in hospital. I ended up in an ambulance. So he he guided me through it. But then when it came to a point, he was like, no, this is wrong. Your understanding here is wrong. And then something bad happened. It seemed to be bad to me, but he was with me in all of it. And I learned something about who he was through something that I thought was very bad at the time. And there's been many incidents of this happening recently. Please do not move away from here until I come to you and bring out my offering and set it before you. And he said, I shall stay until you return. And Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket and the broth in a pot. And he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree, and he presented this. This is an incredibly similar situation to what we're seeing with Abraham here. He takes an animal of the flock, he prepares it. He makes unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. Now when he goes into Sarah, he says, take 3 measures of fine flour and prepare unleavened bread. But that word measure is actually thought to be 1/3 of an ephah. So 3 of them would be an ephah of flour. And where are they when this is happening? They're underneath the terebinth trees. So it's a very similar situation that we're seeing here. And the angel of Elohim said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. And the angel of Yehovah put forth the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. The fire went up out the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And the angel of Yehovah went from his sight. So he gives him a sign. He asks him for a sign. So I've said it to people before, but if you think that Yehovah is speaking to you in a way that is just completely unscriptural, then fair enough, but test it. Ask him for a sign that he's speaking to you, because he's not the author of confusion. He doesn't tell you something and then refuse to validate that with you. And if he doesn't give you a sign, it wasn't him. And that can be really dangerous, because we know that we're prone to listening to deceptive and seductive spirits. So if he doesn't give a sign for whatever it is, then it's not from him. I would say to people, don't be looking for those sorts of things anyway to instruct you in your life, because it's unreliable, because it's not found in Scripture. And as I say, we've come to a point where we're obedient to the Torah now. That's just something that we do by faith. But we need to draw closer to Elohim, because we want to know who he actually is. We want to be able to live that life as well, where we're not constantly looking for some kind of guidance and some kind of reassurance, because the idea that everything happens for a reason is incredibly seductive, because it kind of gives you a comfort blanket. Oh, everything's happening for a reason, it's fine. We actually need to be getting our sense of security from knowing that he is Elohim, being still and knowing that he is Elohim in whatever it is that we're going through in our lives. And that provides a much greater sense of security than the false notion of who he is and the false deity idea. And when Gideon saw that he was an angel of Yehovah, Gideon said, O Master Yehovah, for I have seen an angel of Yehovah face to face. And Yehovah said to him, peace be with you. Do not fear, you do not die. So that's an interesting phrase, isn't it, for Yehovah on the earth to be using, peace be with you. I know somebody else who used that phrase. So Abraham ran into the tent to Sarah and said, hurry, make ready 3 measures of fine flour, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf and gave it to a young man, and he hurried to prepare it. And he took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. So Abraham knows that this is Yehovah. I don't know if he recognizes him from when he's appeared to him previously, or whatever it is, but he knows that it's Yehovah. And he's running around like, can you imagine if Yehovah came to visit you one day and you're like, do you want some food? yeah, that'd be nice. And they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, see, in the tent. The word see is not there. She just says in the tent. And he said, I shall certainly return to you according to the time of life. Which is interesting. You think, well, what does he mean? Maybe it was a Hebrew idiom. But we'll look at what it says in the Septuagint. And see, Sarah, your wife, is to have a son. And Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah was past the way of women. Now this is actually really interesting. She was past the way of women. This is translated variously as things like she was past the age of childbearing, various different things. But if we look at what the Hebrew words are, okay, so we've got chadal, and chadal does mean to cease or to stop. But an interesting way that you could translate it, I'm not saying this is how it should be translated, but is to leave something undone. Okay, so something was left undone. What was left undone was this, the arach. And the arach is the way or the path. Okay, the path of women. And it's interesting to me that what is described here as the path of women is childbearing. And what it could be translated to be saying is the path of women was left undone in her, which is an interesting concept. Okay. Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I've grown old, shall I have pleasure, my master being old too? This is what it says in the Septuagint. It says, and he said, returning, I will come to you according to this time, to the hour, is what it says in the Septuagint, not according to the time of life. And will have a son, Sarah your wife. And Sarah heard by the door of the tent, being behind him. And Abraham and Sarah were older, advanced of days, ceased and Sarah to be in the feminine ways. And this passage actually shows us some interesting stuff, or some interesting considerations when we're taking what the Septuagint says compared to what the Masoretic text says. In the first verse, okay, we've got according to this time, to the hour. Now that's very different from according to the time of life in the Hebrew. Okay, so that's distinctly different. Whereas in the second verse, you read it and go, well, that's very different as well. But what we need to consider is the feminine ways. It's kind of the same way that the English translators have taken the path of women and given us an interpretation of its meaning. So we've got one which is actually very distinctly different, and we've got one which is a translation. It's not saying that it's definitely ceased, and it's not saying it should be the feminine ways instead of the way that it's rendered in the Hebrew. It's just a translation of the Hebrew. So we do have to be very careful when we're taking these things, that we don't say, well, that seems to be very different, without looking any deeper at the words that are used. Laughed and Sarah in herself, saying, for not yet has it happened to me until now, and my Lord is older. Okay, so it kind of ties in with the idea with the path of women was left undone in her, and she says, for not yet it has happened to me until now. And the Lord said to Abraham, why is it that Sarah laughed in herself, saying, indeed, is it truly I will bear and have grown old? Is impossible to the Lord the saying, at this time, to the hour, I will return to you, and there will be to Sarah a son? Okay, so it's different, isn't it? Verse 13 says, and Yehovah said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I truly have a child since I am old? Is any matter too hard for Yehovah? At the appointed time, I'm going to return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah is to have a son. Now, again, we can see something interesting from the translation, because we know the appointed time in Hebrew is Moedim. They're not always the feast days. The feast days are Yehovah's Moedim, so they're his appointed times, but there can be an appointed time outside of that. It's a concept which exists independently. Okay, at the appointed time. And the word that's used in the Greek there is the word that is in Genesis 1 when it says they shall be for days and years and for seasons. The word seasons we know is Moedim in the Hebrew. So what we have in the Greek is a rendering of what it says in the Hebrew again, but it seems to be written differently. But again, this according to the time of life, okay, that is the et chai in Hebrew, et time, chai life. So it literally says the time of life, whereas in the Greek, it does use the word ora, which is hour. Okay, to the hour, it says in the Greek. So I'd suggest that that's a significant difference. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. And this is interesting to me with this idea of these people are coming to know who he is through their interactions with him. When we consider in Exodus 6:3, it says, I appeared to Abraham, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov as El Shaddai, and by my name, Yehovah, I have not been known to them. Okay, so when he appeared to them, he appeared as God Almighty, the powerful El. Okay, he said, by my name, Yehovah, I have not been known to them. And we've looked before at how Yehovah is a contraction of the three tenses of I am. Okay, it's he who was, who is, and is to come. Okay, and they didn't know him as the Yehovah outside of time. We've had people send messages commenting, saying, why do you use the name Yehovah? Why is it Yehovah? Hovah means destruction. Well, the problem is you can't parse a Hebrew word like that. The way that Yehovah is correctly parsed is that it's the three forms of I am, which is why he says, I am that I am, and then he says, therefore go and tell them that Yehovah has sent you. And we'll have people say, like, well, why don't you use the word Yahweh? Okay, so I thought I would explain these things. We don't use the name Yahweh because Yahweh comes from, the only source for Yahweh is Gesenius, the guy that wrote the Hebrew Chaldee lexicon. And he makes an argument for Yahweh because the Samaritans, the Sumerians were heard to have used the name Yahweh. The problem with that is they had a temple which was supposed to be a temple to Yehovah. They had another unauthorized temple, but it became a temple to Jupiter. And Jupiter in that language is Yahweh Pater. Yahweh Pater. So when they were heard to speak the name Yahweh, we've got Yahweh Pater, which can be interpreted as Father Yahweh. Pater, as in paternal. Yahweh Pater is not Father Yahweh, it's Jupiter. So we don't use the name Yahweh either because there's just no source for the name Yahweh. Similarly, the name Yahuwah. Okay, Yahuwah. Yahuwah is actually a word that's been made up recently. We've got no kind of historical record of it existing as a word for one really good reason. In Hebrew, Yahuwah isn't a word that you can write. You can't have the two vowels next to each other like that. It's just not a valid Hebrew word. People think that it has to be Yahoo something because the prophets all have Yahoo in their name. Well, that's just not actually correct. You know, we've got the name Elijah written as Eliyah as well as Eliyahu, and when you have Yahoo on the end of names, oftentimes you'll find them written elsewhere with just Yah on the end. We'll see an example later on, but that's not even a good argument for why that would have to be part of his name anyway. We know that Yah refers to Yah. It doesn't refer to the Tetragrammaton. It refers to his poetic name, if you like, that's written throughout the scriptures, which is Yah. So we don't use any of those. We use Yehovah because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of documents which have his name with all of the vowel points in. You don't find that with Yahweh. You'll never find Yahweh written down anywhere. ever find Yahuwah written down anywhere. And we have seen the 119 Ministries teaching on the name Yehovah. We watched it, and in fact, when we watched it, we thought, wow, that's really interesting information. We might have to change the name that we use here. But further investigation into their claims has yielded that there's a greater context to understand the things that they say in. The letter Vav being translated, or being in fact a war instead of a Vav. There's great arguments for it, but again, if you understand the greater context of the arguments, you just get a bit deeper knowledge of those things. And it's actually the other way around, that the Vav preceded the war. But we are familiar with all of these arguments, and we've looked into all these things. So for anyone thinking, why are they using this stupid name? Have they not seen the 119 Ministries video? We have, and we're using the name that we have, a massive historical record. We're going to see a place mentioned in this Torah portion called Yehovah Yireh. Okay, people say that the vowel pointings are not in his name, but when his name makes up part of a place name, the vowel pointings are all in place. So if you read the Hebrew, the vowel pointings are all there for Yehovah Yireh, or Jehovah Jireh, as people call it. So absolutely everything points to the fact that his name is Yehovah. Yahweh is part of Yahweh Jupiter. Yahuwah is a word that has only come into existence recently, and it's kind of something that the Hebrew roots movement have come up with. It's not even a valid Hebrew word, so just some great understanding there. But they didn't know him as Yehovah. And this is interesting because you can see this in this interaction with Sarah. You think, if you knew that's Yehovah, how are you possibly thinking that you can say to him, I didn't laugh? Because they didn't understand who he was. Okay, they didn't know him as the one who was, who is, and is to come, the one who's outside of time. They understood him as this incredibly powerful God. Because you've got to think, how had they encountered him? All of the times that they'd encountered him up until this point revealed nothing of the fact that he would know. You did laugh. Okay, she's learning here on the fly who he is. The men rose up from there and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them away. And Yehovah said, am I concealing from Abraham what I am doing? Amos 3:7 says, the Master Yehovah does no matter unless he reveals his secret to his servants, the prophets. Okay, who is Abraham? He's his servant. And as we'll see later in the Torah portion, he is a prophet. Okay, that's who Abraham is. He is one of his servants, the prophets. Since Abraham certainly becomes a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth have been blessed in him. Again, we've got this future perfect tense used here. All the nations of the earth have been blessed in him. This is who I am. I'm Yehovah. The future is known to me. The future's already happened, if you like, because I'm the one who was, who is, and is to come. I am. Okay? For I have known him, that he commands his children and his household after him, and they have guarded the way of Yehovah to do righteousness and justice, that Yehovah may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. So he says, I've known him. Okay, you think in future perfect tense, I have known him, which is interesting. Romans 8:29 says, those whom he knew beforehand. This is what it is to be known of Yehovah. It's to be foreknown by him. He says, I've known Abraham. Abraham is not going to be one of the ones to whom Yeshua says, I never knew you. Okay, they're all going to come to him and say, look at all these amazing works we did. And he's just going to say, you're not one of the chosen. I never knew you. And Yehovah said, because the outcry against Sodom and Amorah is great, and because their sin is very heavy, I'm going down now to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me, and if not, I know. So the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom, but Yehovah still stood before Abraham. I think this is very interesting because we've got this idea of who Yehovah is, but when they were building the Tower of Babel, and here he says, I'm going to go down to the earth and I'm going to have a look. Okay, so it's something that's worth considering. I don't really know what to make from that personally, but again, we've got to take away what we think we know about Yehovah, and we've got to learn who he is from what we read. Interesting here where it says Yehovah still stood before Abraham. This is what it says in the Masoretic text. And in the kind of the rabbinical traditions in Judaism, they put these people, they put Abraham, Yitzchak and Yaakov up on a pedestal as if they were sinless, and they're revered like Yehovah. They say when Abraham has this interchange with him about, will you do it for this many people and this many people, they say that Abraham was actually bargaining down Yehovah, that he was changing Yehovah's opinion on it. That it was Abraham who was directing all of this, and they put power in the hands of men much more. They say that the Torah is not in heaven, means that it's not for Yehovah to have given us a concrete Torah, that now it's in the hands of men and men can change it, and this is where you get rabbinical authority to change the word from. But in the Masoretic text, it says Yehovah still stood before Abraham. In the Septuagint, it says Abraham was still standing before Yehovah, which is just a different dynamic, isn't it? Abraham standing before Yehovah, or Yehovah was standing before Abraham. And there's actually something that's still in the Masoretic text that we'll see later, which confirms that it was Abraham standing before Yehovah, not the other way around. Abraham drew near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wrong? And again, he's learning who Yehovah is here, and he starts to bargain him down. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to act in this way, to slay the righteous with the wrong, so that the righteous should be as the wrong. Far be it from you. Does the judge of all the earth not do right? Again, he's learning who he is. He's not commanding Yehovah and how Yehovah sees things. He's learning who he is, and he's saying, you're the judge of all the earth. You are El Shaddai. Are you going to do something that is wrong? You're going to slay the righteous? And Yehovah says, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I shall spare it for all the place for their sakes. And Abraham answered and said, look, please, I who am but dust and ashes have taken it upon myself to speak to Yehovah. Suppose there are 5 less than the 50 righteous. Would you destroy all of the city for the lack of 5? And he said, if I find there 45, I destroy not. And he spoke to him yet again and said, suppose there are found 40. And he said, I do not because of the 40. And he said, please let Yehovah not be displeased, and I speak. Suppose there are found 30. And he said, I do not if I find 30 there. He said, please, I've taken it upon myself to speak to Yehovah. Suppose there are found 20. And he said, I do not destroy for the sake of 20. And he said, please let not Yehovah be displeased, and I will speak only this time. Suppose there are found 10. And he said, I do not destroy for the sake of 10. So Abraham's learning who he is. We're going to learn more of who Yehovah is when he actually goes to Sodom and Amorah, because he doesn't destroy it for 4 people. In fact, Lot is the only one which is described in the scriptures as righteous. So it's not 10, that wasn't the limit. Abraham's just said to him, look, I'm not going to ask you anymore. What about 10 people? And it's perhaps true that Abraham thought that they were going to find 10 righteous there because of Lot's family, which we'll see. But Yehovah will not destroy for the sake of the righteous, and we're going to see him tell us that. Again, I appeared to Abraham, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov as El Shaddai, and by my name, Yehovah, I have not been known to them. So when we're seeing these interactions, we have to bear in mind that they are just learning who he is. They had the concept of who he is. They appreciated some of who he was, but they didn't know who he was like we know who he is. Then Yehovah went away as soon as he had ended speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. And we're not going to see Yehovah again until Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening. So there were three of them. Two of them went off, and these are the two that we see here. Yehovah stayed with Abraham, and we'll see him again shortly. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. And when Lot saw them, he rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face towards the ground. And he said, "Look, please, my masters, turn into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet, and rise early and go your way." Which I think is a weird thing for him to have said to them. I don't really understand the context of what's going on here. Maybe he was trying to tell them, I'm not going to trouble you or keep you up. But the idea of wash your feet, come inside, rise early, and get on your way just reads weird to me. And they said, "No, but let us spend the night in the open square." And he urged them strongly, and they turned into him and came into his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. And the word feast there is mishta. Because when I read this, I thought, that's weird, isn't it? He made them a feast when they'd come in the evening. And also baked unleavened bread. The unleavened bread isn't part of the feast. I just thought that's weird. So I looked at the word mishta, and it can mean a feast, like a big spread of food, but it can also mean a drink, which is what I think this probably means. He made them a drink and baked them unleavened bread, and they ate. I think that's probably more likely than he made them a feast, but maybe he did. Maybe he appreciated who they were. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every part surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us and let us know them. We want to have sex with these men." And bear in mind who this is. Okay, the men of the city, both old and young, all the people from every part, and they all come with this request. So Lot went out to them through the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, "Please, my brothers, do not do evil. Look, please, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you and do to them as you wish. Only do no deed to these men, because they've come under the shadow of my roof." And there's an idea that the reason that he was doing this was because he knew that they were all homosexuals, and it would enrage them, and then they would turn their attention to him, which is what ends up happening. But I think we have to be very careful when we're saying this is why this happened, this is what Lot was thinking, this is what he was trying to do, because we're not actually told explicitly. But they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This one came in to sojourn, and should he always judge? Now we're going to treat you worse than them." So you can see where this idea comes in. Should he always judge, as in he's judging us for being gay. But you could also interpret it and say, well, he was sitting in the gate, which is where people would sit to judge. And when people have authority, people tend to become jealous of them, and they tend to dislike them. And kind of like, it's that guy who set himself up as a judge. He only came in here to sojourn, and now he's the judge. Now we're going to treat you worse than them. They pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, and they wearied themselves to find the door. And the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, a son-in-law, and your sons and your daughters, and whomever you have in the city? Bring them out of this place, for we are going to destroy this place, because the cry against them has grown great before the face of Yehovah, and Yehovah has sent us to destroy it." Lot went out to speak with his sons-in-law who had married his daughters and said, "Get up, get out of this place, for Yehovah is going to destroy this city." But to his sons-in-law he seemed to be as one joking. So we know that Lot has 2 daughters. There's him, there's his wife. Then we know that he has other daughters and he has sons-in-law. So it's actually possible that he had 3 daughters and 3 sons-in-law, and that was 10 people. And Abraham, when he said, "Would you destroy it for the sake of 10, was thinking of these people. But when he goes to speak to them, he seemed to be as one joking, which kind of tells us a little bit about where they were at, spiritually speaking. 1 Corinthians 2 verse 14 says, the natural man does not receive the matters of the Spirit of Elohim, for they are foolishness to him, and he is unable to know them. They're foolishness to him. And this is the way when we interact with people, whether they be Torah keepers, who are not people just following by faith, they're kind of following by works, and I think that I should be doing this, and I'm going to do it, and I'm not sure that I can do that. That's a bit hard. People who are doing it by works, and then people are doing it by faith. But the natural man does not receive the matters of the Spirit of Elohim, and their foolishness to him. He cannot know them, he cannot understand them. When morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. Okay, so what I want you to remember from this passage is that morning dawned when they were with Lot and his family in Lot's house. Okay, that's when morning dawns. And while he loitered, the men took hold of his hand and his wife's hand and the hands of his 2 daughters, Yehovah having compassion on him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. And it came to be when they brought them outside that he said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be consumed. And Lot said to them, oh no, Yehovah, look please, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have increased your kindness, which you've shown me by saving my life. But I am unable to escape to the mountains, lest calamity overtake me and I die. So remember, when Yehovah said to him, go to the mountains, Lot says, oh no, I can't do it. Think, where does Lot end up eventually? Where does Lot go to live? He ends up in the mountains, doesn't he? It's where Yehovah told him to go at first, but he wanted things to be different, and Yehovah is gracious and he's patient with him. Look, please, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is small. Please let me escape there. Is it not a small matter? And let my life be saved. And he said to him, look, I have favored you concerning this matter also, without overthrowing this city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I am not able to do any deed until you arrive there. Okay, it's interesting, isn't it? Abraham's learning who he is. Would you destroy it for the sake of 50 righteous? No, I wouldn't. He says to Lot, you need to leave this place because I'm going to destroy it. I can't destroy it until you leave. So the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Okay, so when did morning dawn? Morning dawned when they were in Lot's house. When did the sun rise? The sun rose on the earth when they entered Zoar, however long that was afterwards, an hour and a half, 2 hours afterwards. So the idea that the day starts when dawn comes is just scripturally inaccurate, because the morning dawns before the sun rises. Okay, there's no way that you can get around that. Yehovah rained sulfur and fire on Sodom and Amorah from Yehovah out of the heavens. That's an interesting statement, isn't it? Yehovah rained sulfur and fire on Sodom and Amorah from Yehovah out of the heavens. It's easy to understand though, isn't it? Because of what we were looking at before. Yehovah rained fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from Yehovah in the heavens. The idea that there's a Yehovah on the earth and there's a Yehovah in the heavens is something that we find in this narrative as well. So he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a post of salt. And we'll come back in the second part and continue this.